I'm Avital Levin. I'm a social worker and the Director of Education for Shalom Task Force. I'm very proud of the Education Department. Together with a team of dedicated presenters, we teach individuals about forming and sustaining healthy relationships. Last year, our educational programs reached over 5,000 individuals across the US and internationally. Even if only one person's life was altered by our workshop, we know we are one step closer to living our mission of safe relationships, healthy families, and a supportive community. I'm joined by Esther Williams, who's the president for Shalom Task Force. And we held this program a few months ago, and there was a huge follow-up request for more. Through this virtual platform, we can now reach even more people. The program's emphasis tonight will be on the dater with the role of parents as support. Questions can be submitted throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature and are submitted privately to us. For participants on the Facebook Live or phone, you can submit questions using the link shalomtaskforce.org/LCW. If any questions are not answered, you can always reach out to us directly at Shalom Task Force or to our anonymous confidential hotline, 888-883-2323, and that number is posted in the chat. We see tonight's program as a springboard for ongoing dialogue and support, and hopefully it will provide the framework for you to continue the conversation. The length of tonight's content has been condensed. Additional resources can be found on our website. This program is being recorded, and a parallel program for men and parents will take place this Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock. Both programs contain unique content and ideas, so I invite you to attend that webinar as well. Recordings for both programs will be available on our website, shalomtaskforce.org. So tonight's content is based on years of questions raised at educational programs and in calls to our hotline. We have curated top 10 most frequently asked questions about dating and relationships. Esther Williams is a longtime advocate for Shalom Task Force and has been immersed in every aspect of our work. Having presented educational programs for several years, she has fielded many complex questions and brings a wealth of knowledge to this topic. Esther, thank you for joining me, and please tell us a bit more about Shalom Task Force.
I'm going to begin by asking your indulgence, as when we planned this webinar, I didn't know that I would be in a different time zone. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, so if I refer to my notes, please forgive me. The roots of our organization. Long before domestic abuse was being discussed in the community at large, before O.J. Simpson, Shalom Task Force was started 27 years ago by a group of concerned women who recognized that there were victims of domestic abuse in our own community. Our first goal was to connect victims and survivors with resources in a safe and supportive way. Our confidential hotline has since answered 26,000 calls from friends, relatives, victims, survivors, mentors, friends, and those dating. Though I am no longer on the hotline, I personally was one of the first of 70 volunteer-trained advocates who man the line. I want to share with you the most traumatic calls that I received, the ones that left me shaking. They were not the victims that you expect, that were necessarily raised in violent homes or with low self-esteem, or who had been off the derech and fell into compromised shidduchim. Though we were trained to know that this can happen to anyone, the ones that were most haunting was a young lady who could have been my own daughter. A bright and confident young woman raised in a warm, stable, and emotionally healthy home who was now confused, frightened, vulnerable. How did she get here? This was the impetus for the next step of Shalom Task Force. We created our education department, programming for critical stakeholders in the community, religious leaders, educators, mental health professionals, shadchanim, and the community at large, along with Sarah's Voice, our legal department, and Shalom Workshop for already engaged couples to learn important relationship skills. But most importantly, we created workshops for our own sons and daughters, teaching them the necessary skills to be in safe, healthy relationships, and programs for you, their parents, to support and nurture them through the process. Avital?
So let's start with our first question. How do I know I am ready to date? And we've been asked this question often. Just today, a couple of people submitted this very question. And we start by encouraging everyone to recognize first, in the Orthodox community, marriage is held up as a pinnacle of achievement. At times, these expectations and pressures can affect decision-making in the dating process. So it's an important step to even ask yourself the question, am I ready? Avoid the trap of approaching dating as if on autopilot. Everyone else is starting to date, so I guess I should just start to date. Sometimes people who even just ask themselves this question are already one step ahead. And by asking yourselves, what is motivating you to begin to date? Dr. Abraham J. Tversky stated, marriage is not a hospital. It's not the place to rush to fix things or to figure out your issues. The idea is really to know yourself, know what you need, know what you're looking for. Self-awareness is something that comes more naturally for some people, but it can be a skill that is deepened. We can spend an entire session on this. We won't. If you have more interest in learning more about self-awareness, again, please check out our website. Additionally, you can also follow up to request more workshops, a workshop for a group, for a community. We have a lot of different topics of workshops that we cover for the community, so please feel free to follow up in that way as well. And parents, know your child and know yourself. Parents are also heavily influenced by social pressures to have our child make the perfect match. And it takes a certain honesty to tune into what's coming up for you as the parent during this process. I think back to a friend of my husband and mine who used to share with us a lot about his dating experiences and his dating process. And he shared that at that time, he noticed that whenever one of his friends would get engaged, they would post their picture to only simchas, and everyone would congratulate them and shower them with brachos. Mazel tov, we're so excited for you. Great job. Can't wait to dance at your wedding. You did it. All these accolades, all this attention. And he shared that for him, who had been struggling with dating, there were a lot of highs and lows, as a lot of people will share and relate to about the dating process, lots of trials and tribulations. He shared that he wanted to create a website called Almost Simchas. And this would be a place for people to share their breakup stories, a picture of them maybe crying, and for people to offer them support during that difficult dating or breakup process. Comments like, you tried so hard, you expended so much energy. We know how hard you really worked on yourself. We know you were hoping this would work out and it didn't. And of course, that's, a parody. Nobody, as far as I know, this is not a website that exists. But there is actually a lot of truth to what he shared. Because as a society, we do assign tremendous emphasis to the product, the finish line of the chuppah. And we can really create more opportunity to value all of the aspects of growth that can happen during the dating process, and to really give people more credit for that, for the effort, for the energy extended, for showing up for a date, even if it's difficult, for being able to get through a rejection process or a breakup process. We can definitely create more space for that. The next very important question is, of course, what am I looking for in a partner? Esther?
This reminds me of a call I got many years ago from a young lady. She had gone to a school that really advocated her marrying someone who was in chinuch or sitting and learning, and that was presented as the ideal. she married a lovely young man who ultimately went to medical school and spent a lot of time studying, as was necessary. And she was calling because she was beginning to feel very, very shaky and sad, because she was looking at her friends who had married the ideal, and she felt like she had failed. It was starting to affect her marriage and how she looked at her husband. Ironically, we would be getting similar phone calls from the young lady who did choose the other choice, and who possibly was realizing that maybe she was young and she hadn't really thought it through, and maybe she wasn't really cut out for the life that she had chosen. And these stories, though they felt simplistic, they happen all the time. Expectations and messages that people internalize throughout their education, throughout their lives, from their homes, weigh heavily on their dating and their marriage choices, causing confusion sometimes. We're not here to judge one way of life or the other, or one priority or the other, but to encourage people to be aware and honest of the motivation of their dating preferences and their life goals. Be honest about your needs. Your needs. Don't shy away from what you think others will perceive as superficial or materialistic, or perhaps too lofty and spiritual, but not practical. Being in the dated state, it's most important for you to recognize who you are, what you personally need, and then what does a healthy relationship look like?
So we just talked about giving value to our own individual subjective priorities. I think about a story of a student who approached me at a workshop and asked very sincerely, how do you know what a healthy relationship is? And the question really highlights the need for awareness around clearly identifying healthy markers of a relationship, not making assumptions about what people know or don't know, or how people are able to automatically just have a healthy relationship. So at school workshops, students really enjoy doing an exercise where we ask them to describe some of the positive traits that they would be excited to share with a friend who they are setting up for a date. They list several traits that they might describe to their friend, perhaps someone outgoing or intelligent, maybe someone tall. Then we hone in on those traits to be able to really identify which of those are subjective to that person. That will determine personal, unique compatibility. And as Esther explained, those subjective needs cannot be ignored. But then we come up with our list of the non-negotiable, universal markers that every single person needs to have in place in a healthy relationship. So what are those universal markers of a healthy relationship? So as we look at this list, we see above all respect. And that's really the overarching marker, dynamic trait, so to speak, that needs to be in place in a healthy relationship. It is the antidote to the power control dynamic of an abusive relationship. And it is the key to a healthy, loving relationship. So under respect, some of the other positive markers that need to be in place, trust, honesty, really being able to trust the person, and as you as a healthy partner, to be honest, to be someone who your partner can trust. Being able to share ideas, having a voice in the relationship. What does it mean to have a voice in a relationship? What does it mean to have your opinion heard, your opinion respected? Feeling positive about the relationship. And that's one that really becomes much more clear even when we talk about the opposite, when we talk about some of the red flags in a relationship that might point to an abusive relationship, we're able to better understand what it means to feel positive about the relationship. Just generally to feel good about it, to feel light, not to feel dragged down, not to feel like there's something very heavy about the relationship. Feeling overall relaxed and safe. And again, that really parallels to later on when we talk about the experience of feeling like you're walking on eggshells, in a relationship, and how that is something that is often described by individuals who call our hotline. So being able to feel just generally safe, asking yourself the question, do I feel safe with this person? Being able to take space. So taking space is one that I think is becoming increasingly more difficult to really ascertain in relationships, and especially in dating. Esther, we talk a lot about how there is, and we will speak about this later on when we speak about some pressures, just really this sense of people having more difficulty to kind of take a step back and process and not feel so connected every minute through phone or through social media, through WhatsApp to the person. The taking space in a relationship is really, really critical, and really key to recognizing if your partner is somebody who's able to respect your space, and if you are able to take important space in the relationship.
One of the most common questions that was asked over the years was, what is the appropriate dating timeline? And I like to answer it in this way, that it's not about time in the way that we know it. It's not about a day, a week, a month, how many years. It's about what is happening during that time. What's the depth of the relationship? For some couples, for a Hasidic couple, it might be an hour basho where they just connect in a way that she feels safe and she feels she can talk. Or in some relationships, it might take 3 years to get to that place where there's healthy communication, conflict resolution. Each couple is unique in how long it might take them to the point of feeling safe and confident in their relationship. So when we talk about how long, we want to know that there's depth to the questions and priorities that are raised, that they have shared values, that they feel compatibility, and most importantly, that they feel safe and trust each other.
Right, and Esther, when you speak to that idea of the depth in the relationship, it reminds me about how important it is for us to really stress that we're not looking to provide something that in any way might feel cookie cutter. We're really encouraging people to tune in to the depth, the substance, asking bigger questions and more complex and depth-filled questions. Esther, I've shared with you this story, how I was approached by someone a couple of years ago who, when he learned that I worked for Shalom Task Force, he got so excited and he said, you know, I've been waiting to share the story with somebody who works for Shalom Task Force. And he shared that when he was dating someone, everything was going great, and he was feeling great. He was excited. The woman who he was dating seemed to be happy and excited about the relationship. The shadchan gave her thumbs up. Everything was going well. And suddenly they were on a date where, when he was driving, there was a yellow light up ahead. And he slowed down, and he actually came to a full stop at the yellow. And the person who he was dating at the time turned to him and said, do you always stop for a yellow? Like you don't just go right through before the light turns red? And he said, oh, I mean, totally. If I wasn't on a date with you, of course I would probably speed right through. But you know, since we're on the date, I decided to drive a little more carefully and slow down. Boom. She didn't want to go out with him again. And when he tried to understand what happened, he asked the shadchan. The shadchan explained that this girl shared with her that she had taken a Shalom Task Force workshop, and the presenter spoke about the idea of looking out for some of the red flags and looking out for somebody who might show you one side, but in fact, they really are somebody else. Perhaps looking out for somebody who comes off as extra charming or seems like they're putting on a show. This might point to some red flags. And now this person took that message very literally, maybe way too literally, to the point that without even checking into this further or finding out if maybe there was, you know, more to this situation, she kind of just X'd him off the list. And we want to caution against that. You know, we want to, of course, raise awareness. We want to, of course, give people an understanding of what some of the red flags are. But we want to really balance that. We want to temper that with having the depth and the understanding and the complexity to be able to approach dating in a way that you're using a lot of different tools and not addressing anything in a way that is a little bit too cut and dry. So, you know, we're not looking to test people. I always encourage presenters when we're going out to schools to really encourage students and whoever is in a dating situation to really be an active participant in the process, not to be a passive observer, right? And some of the messaging that we do receive sometimes feels like it can be a little bit checklist. And we're cautioning against that, not to go out onto dates with almost this checklist of check, 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 red flag, X, cross it off. Perhaps there is something that is an immediate red flag and that the person maybe does need to be eliminated as an option. But to be able to kind of trust yourselves and to utilize some of these tools with also being an active participant, knowing when to ask questions, knowing how to explore something a little bit more if it seems concerning before immediately just discarding the relationship. So our next question, which we lead right into, is what happens when we don't agree? And we're asked this question a lot, and we think about the idea that if everything is just perfect, then let's be sure to assess if there is enough depth to the dating relationship. And again, we're not out looking for problems, but dating should somewhat reflect real life marriage. So every single relationship includes conflict. So we need to be able to look at how conflict plays out in the relationship. And sometimes when people hear conflict, they assume that that must mean this big screaming match that's happening on a date. And we're certainly not referring to conflict in that way. We're looking at conflict as this overarching theme of figuring out what it's like to work through an issue together. What does it look like for you to have a disagreement with a person? What happens if there's a change of plans? What happens if you have a difference of opinion? Can you express your opinion? What happens if you express your opinion and it's not the same opinion as your partner? How might they respond then? We look at conflict when we're thinking about decision making, and how does that happen? Is it always one person making every single decision and the other person stopping to have a voice, starting to lose their voice in the relationship? This is how we want to think about conflict, really as a tool. So we want to be able to see how a partner responds to conflict, and that really tells us a lot. So it's not really about solving the conflict, it's about assessing how conflict plays out, and most of all, how you feel in the process. So really, regardless of whether you got your way or you gave in, it's really more about something that you might have observed and how you feel. So Esther, we'll go right into our next question. How do I know if this is just nerves or if something is really wrong?
This is a very common question for young people to ask. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm too nervous. Maybe I'm too picky. Maybe I'm too critical. The bottom line is it's absolutely necessary to trust your gut. Tune into your gut intuition about something that feels not quite right can potentially point to danger, or it can be something workable that needs to be addressed. Either of those cases require effort to trust your gut and to address the issue. Whether the issue may be yours, or it might be something that really is leading you as a pattern towards red flags. And I remember one of many uncomfortable phone calls, but I'll call her Miriam. She called the hotline and described the escalation of years of abuse in her marriage. When she reflected on her dating process, in hindsight, the red flags were there. She described the edginess in his mood on a date when people on the next table were making a lot of noise. He was tense for the rest of the evening. He apologized the next morning and made excuses, but she found herself trying to avoid any situations that would put him in a bad mood. In marriage, it escalated to him shouting at her and losing it when their baby was crying, holding her responsible for not being a good mother, for causing him stress. In retrospect, as we spoke, she connected all the dots of the patterns of those behaviors that were already playing out in her dating situation. But at the time, sadly, she lacked the awareness of what red flags were and the language to even describe how she was feeling. And so she wasn't able to get the proper help. This is vital awareness to have during dating. Trusting your gut, that uh-oh feeling. It can point to something that's workable, or it could simply be a misunderstanding. But when there's a pattern of behavior that makes you uncomfortable, it cannot be ignored. Never sweep feelings under the rug. It's always helpful to address something that doesn't feel right and to seek help. The worst case scenario, you will determine that it was a misunderstanding or miscommunication or general nerves and feel reassured. But the OO feeling can point to red flags of abuse, and it's important that we know what those are. Avital?
Yeah, and Esther, so far I'm just looking, we have several comments and about 15 questions already that came in. And of course, we're not going to be able to address everything. But so far, there are just a couple that I want to mention here, and hopefully we'll be able to speak about this some more as we're going.
Session at 4 o'clock in the morning, anytime.
As we're moving into being able to assess if a relationship is unsafe or unhealthy. We've also been asked, how do you know if you're ready to date again after a broken engagement? What about if some of the red flags are ones that go on in your home? Somebody asked about being able to define respect some more. So we're gonna kind of put all of this out there, let it percolate a little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of those now in the next few questions. So let's move into, how do I assess if a relationship is unsafe or unhealthy? And we're going to start with a really clear definition of domestic abuse here. And it's really important for us to work with a very clear definition, because just like we want to kind of caution and encourage people to utilize the balance when we're approaching dating, and we're not looking to scare people and to heighten everybody's sense of hypervigilance that if one thing goes wrong, oh no, maybe this person's an abuser. We want to be very mindful and very strategic and very careful about identifying domestic abuse with a very clear definition, and it is a very specific dynamic of something that is going on in a relationship. So the way that we define domestic abuse or domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to gain and maintain power and control over their partner, and instill fear in an intimate relationship. And we want to really emphasize that it's a pattern of behaviors, because as we start to list some of the red flags, we're again encouraging people to recognize that a domestic abuse relationship is a pattern of red flags. It's a pattern of tactics. It's a pattern of behaviors that one partner uses to maintain control of their partner. So let's be aware of the red flags of abuse, and let's look out for some of these. Let's look at the list of some of the red flags. And as Esther shared, these red flags cannot be ignored. So if one of these is coming up and you're noticing one of these and you're concerned, it cannot be ignored. Now, that doesn't mean that something might come up that perhaps is a misunderstanding. It doesn't mean that there's never room for one of these behaviors, traits, dynamics to ever take place in a relationship, but it's really about looking out for that pattern. And if you're, and being able to kind of connect the dots between some of these different behaviors. And if you're noticing any red flag, for example, we're gonna look at temper, that is still something that's really important to raise a concern about, get help, and speak to someone about. And whether somebody has a temper but they're not abusive, that is something that we need to get more information about. So let's look at the list of red flags. Of course, we have at the very top disrespect, which is, as we said earlier, you know, these two charts, the universal markers of a healthy relationship, directly contrast with our list of red flags that can point to an abusive relationship. So overarching disrespect, just general disrespect in a relationship. And someone actually typed in a question asking, can you explain a little bit more? What does that mean, respect? What is respect? So when we talk here about disrespect, it's about a way, it's treating someone with a general sense of disrespect. And the way that that might play out is through some of these other areas that we look at here, or just in general, demonstrating a tone, a sign of disrespect, a general attitude of disrespect for a partner. And maybe sometimes asking ourselves the questions, if for somebody who, let's say, has never dated anyone, but every single person from the second we are born, we are engaged in relationships. So we can actually think about other relationships that we're engaged in our lives, and think about, what does it feel to be respected in a relationship? Maybe by a friend, maybe by a family member. What does that feel like? Or what does it look like to be disrespected in a relationship? What does it look like for somebody to act in a way that's disrespectful to you? Being able to kind of use these other relationships that we have to gain more self-awareness and figure out what some of these factors might feel like in a dating relationship. Lying, dishonesty, that is one that comes up absolutely as a red flag that can point to abuse. Somebody who's very dishonest, they lie, you can't really trust them. Someone who puts you down or criticizes you constantly. Again, that pattern. Somebody who's putting you down. And again, when we talk about pattern, you see it's a little bit complicated, because on a date, even if just one thing is going on, if somebody is criticizing you on a date, that's certainly a real concern. That's certainly a red flag, because generally people are putting their best foot forward in dating. So if somebody is criticizing you, making you feel small, putting you down, that certainly is alarming and definitely needs to be explored, and we need to get help. The general sense of walking on eggshells, the fear. And that's one that is a very specific experience that's pervasive for someone who's in an abusive relationship. Again, like I mentioned earlier, when people call our hotline and they describe the abusive relationship they're in, very often they'll use this terminology of, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I feel like I'm always afraid, afraid of something, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of, something not being perfect right then and how the person might respond, afraid of having an opinion. They just feel a general sense of feeling afraid and unsafe in the relationship. The temper. So that's one that for sure needs to be looked at, needs to be explored. If somebody is demonstrating temper when you're dating, you need to speak to someone, you need to get help. And that could look like, temper could look like, it could be obvious. It could be somebody, speeding in traffic and glaring at the person next to them who they're passing. Because again, that would probably be, if that's happening on a date, that's pretty concerning. It could be, temper could be more subtle. It could be somebody giving you the silent treatment for 2 hours on a date. because maybe something you said didn't sit well with them. And that could be that the temper playing out in almost this menacing, controlling way. Controlling, possessive, jealous, that really works in the opposite way of taking space and giving someone respectful space. When somebody demonstrates being very controlling, being very possessive, constantly being jealous, checking up on you, not being comfortable with you not answering them right away, asking you incessantly who you're talking to, or if somebody, if you're spending time with someone and not with them, that's something that we point to as a red flag. And when we assess for these patterns, and when we're looking at some of these traits, you know, we could ask ourselves, for example, is it okay for one of these to exist? And the answer is of course, right? You know, is jealousy always a bad thing, right? There could certainly be room for jealousy in a healthy relationship, but it's really about how you feel. And if you're noticing patterns and noticing how these dynamics play out, that is really when it's most important to reach out and get help. And if somebody is, for example, using that same example of jealousy, if somebody is demonstrating a little bit of jealousy, but it doesn't seem concerning for you and it's not happening all the time, maybe they're jealous if they notice that somebody looked at you when you were walking into the restaurant. That doesn't necessarily point to abuse. But it's about exploring further how you feel and what else is going on. So we mentioned earlier, of course, the list of the universal healthy markers, and that's what we're going for. You know, that's what everybody is looking for to sustain a healthy relationship. We kind of ordered our questions in this way because we first really need to establish a critical understanding of domestic violence and red flags. We need to be able to first prepare everyone for safety first and foremost, being in a safe relationship. And now we can discuss some of the more general pressures that people experience in dating. So Esther, let's move into our question of how do I navigate pressures in dating?
I remember, this is a very common question. Young people will ask, how do I react to other people's divorces, to failed relationships? And this may cause a lot of anxiety, but I remember once, many years ago, speaking to a group of mothers who were, and one mother said, I don't understand what the big deal is. My daughter is dating the same way I did, and we look at us, we're all fine. And then I asked her a question. I asked her to think about how many people she knew when she was dating so many decades ago who were single at 35 or older. How many people did she know with broken engagements? How many people did she know who were divorced after very short marriages or living back at home with their parents, even with a child? And she wasn't able to give me very large numbers for any of those. I said, now I want you to go and ask your 19-year-old daughter that question today in our world. How many young women she know who are not married? How many friends, sisters are divorced within 3 years of marriage? How many engagement presents do you bother to give with the number of broken engagements that we face today? And we have to realize that that's our children's reality. And that causes great anxiety. And add to that what we did not have, which is the constant contact. I remember when my husband and I were dating, it took him 45 minutes to get back home, and then there had to be a free phone for him to call me. Now it's just constant. You know, you get a phone call from the shotgun, and before you even take the coat off, the boy said, yes, what's your answer? And as Avital said, there's no time to take space to even process what has happened. And then social media, a whole parsha in itself that these mothers hadn't dealt with. And it's important for us as parents to really be aware of the world our children are dating in.
Exactly, Esther. And I'm looking at our time here and we have so far 25 questions that came in, and a couple of them I want to just take a moment to pause and look at and for us to address. So there are a few questions that came in now about the red flags. And so let's go back to that for a minute. One of the questions is, what if someone flips it back? What if an abuser flips it back and says that the victim makes him feel as if he is walking on eggshells and is disrespected, making it so confusing despite his breaking things and really going off on the person? That's a really important question. And that is exactly part of the pattern of an abusive relationship. Somebody who's not being respectful is somebody who is not willing to take accountability for their own actions and using manipulation tactics to make the other partner feel that it's somehow their fault. And this is something that can be very confusing because it almost, the gaslighting, making somebody feel like they're the ones who are perhaps crazy, or maybe they're the ones who are getting it wrong in a relationship, is exactly part of that abusive dynamic and the tendencies that we look out for. So certainly, if this is going on, we encourage you to get help. Somebody also mentioned, what if someone constantly talks about their ex in a way that seems very disrespectful, where they're putting down their ex? And I think that's such an important question and such an important point that you're raising, because we really encourage people to look at not only how the person is treating you, but how they are behaving with other people or speaking about other people. If somebody speaks about other people in a way, let's say speaks about other women that they've dated in a way that seems very disrespectful, maybe very objectifying, assume that that might be how they would speak about you as well. So we look at that, and that's part of really connecting the dots and looking out for the patterns. And Esther, I think it's such an important point, what you're saying about the pressures and how things have shifted, and how in a lot of ways it feels like there's almost even more expectation of people to really look a certain way. There's a tremendous emphasis on image now, and for sure social media just continues to impact that and to attribute to that, where people are constantly posting pictures and able to kind of depict what they want to appear as the perfect image. And so in that way, we are becoming more of an even image-oriented society than we used to be. So with that focus on image, we think about, the pressure that people feel to showcase having attended the right schools, having the perfect shidduch resumes and credentials, so to speak, the focus on pictures, etc. Someone shared with me actually that there was a shadchan, a matchmaker who they were working with, who told them to add more pictures to her resume, that she should put one picture of her in a sporty look in her gym workout clothing, and another picture of her in a more dressed up, dressy look. And that this was something that, concerned her, and it made her feel uncomfortable. And, I'm wondering, like, who knew that this was such a, Miss America pageant, where people have to have all these different looks and all these different pictures. But certainly if this felt objectifying for this woman, for this person who was dating and navigating the dating process, then that's for sure something that we need to be able to support. Nobody should feel objectified. I encourage people to not only identify and establish healthy personal boundaries with a person who you're dating, but also with others involved in the dating process as well. And that includes shadchanim, that could include friends, really establishing the boundaries, thinking about what your boundaries are, setting a boundary, and then deciding if you're comfortable, for example, sending pictures, then that's something that if someone is then pushing you to cross your boundary and send more pictures and send all kinds of pictures, that's a red flag as well. And that's something that you need to be able to know for yourself that you need to be respectful to yourself and to be able to maintain boundaries that you have set for yourself. Another major pressure that comes up for people in dating is a sense of life trajectory, where all our lives, especially in certain insular communities where we grow up with a certain kind of menu, a plan of how our life is going to look, going to specific schools, and then from that school you go on to the next school, and then from there maybe you go to seminary or that yeshiva, and then you get married right away, then you move to that community, then you have kids, then you just rinse and repeat and do it all over again, right? That very specific, what can feel sometimes like a very rigid trajectory, which for some people can work beautifully, and people can be very happy with that. But for some people, the challenge to that happens during the dating stage. When all of someone's life, they could have been able to move through these different stages developmentally at the same time as their peers, graduate at the same time, move on to the next stage at the same time. Suddenly during the dating stage, people encounter feeling more helpless. They might feel more of a sense of lack of control, of not necessarily meeting the person right away, maybe waiting for their phone to ring for months and not having anyone suggest any dates for them, maybe looking at friends of theirs who are getting engaged, married faster, and maybe they find themselves now in a different life stage than friends of theirs who they traveled with their whole lives. So this definitely creates a sense of real pressure that people feel, which can lead to a feeling of helplessness, disappointment, insecurity, wondering if they have any control over this stage and this life trajectory. And I know, Esther, you've shared a story with me similar to this, if you want to share with us.
It's really important to listen to what Avital is saying and understand that it's not just the child who goes through this, but the parent does as well. Every parent wants their child to be happy and to be married and to have those expectations. But a parent also has to be aware of them potentially lowering their standards when they feel this social pressure. I'm going to tell you a personal story. Many years ago, one of my children hadn't yet started dating, and I got a phone call from a Rebbitzin shadchan who a young man had called her to find out about my daughter. She asked me questions, I answered them, didn't know much about the process. And then she said to me, can you tell me some names of some boys that were mentioned to your daughter from our yeshiva? And my daughter wasn't dating yet, but I answered the question. And she said, oh, your daughter's not good enough for those boys. And I said, my daughter's amazing, you don't know her. But I hung up the phone and I realized that if I was a mother whose the phone had not rung in months with a date for my daughter, and this is the reaction I was getting, what was I going to do when the next date was mentioned for my daughter? How much research would I do? What might I look away from? What red flags would I might ignore in order to, as Avital described, for my daughter to be on the trajectory that everybody else is on? So we as parents have to be careful of becoming vulnerable and glossing over concerns or red flags in order to keep our child on the expected trajectory.
And we have, so exactly, Esther, we're talking about that real concern of becoming more vulnerable, and perhaps starting to feel more at risk of, in some ways, maybe lowering priorities, compromising on things that are really important to you, being willing to maybe cross boundaries that you had set for yourself that now suddenly you're feeling more desperate and perhaps you're crossing. And we just got a whole bunch of questions that came in related to looking at what happens if someone you're dating, you see some of the patterns of the red flags, but everybody else says that he seems like a great guy. What happens if you yourself have been in some unhealthy relationships in the past? Does this mean that you're more likely to be in an unhealthy, abusive relationship? What happens if some other men, somebody wrote in, what happens if there are other men who alter their ages on dating apps? Should I also alter my age? And I think this really kind of brings up all these questions of, number one, I want to again take a moment to just recognize how many pressures and how challenging this stage really is for so many people. And I want to really kind of create a space for respect for what everybody who is experiencing challenging is in dating is going through. And that, again, reminding everybody that we are not going to be able to address all of these concerns and questions, but I really encourage you and invite you and implore you to call our Shalom Task Force hotline. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but some people associate our hotline with only calls of severe abuse, and that's not the case. We get calls constantly from individuals who are asking us exactly these types of questions that people are now typing in. Questions about dating, questions about noticing red flags in dating, questions about concerns that you're experiencing. Please call our hotline. Please think about utilizing this space that is free, that is confidential and anonymous. We have excellent referrals that we can provide for you to help you get the right support. So let's go into the next question of, so who can I speak to about dating? And ideally, we want to be able to ask questions or address concerns. All right, so right there we have our shidduch platitudes and unsolicited advice bingo, which I love this picture. I think so many people relate to this picture. Whenever I've used this, when I've given a workshop on dating, people read these off and they're like, yep, my mom is always saying that one. Sorry, no offense to the moms here tonight. Or people giving helpful advice that maybe isn't so helpful. You know, guys like refined girls. Or, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side, right? Like some of these platitudes that don't always feel very supportive or very helpful. So we want to think about, who can I speak to about dating? And ideally, you want to be able to ask questions or address concerns in a way that is not leading. And this, I mean that when I'm talking about, let's say you have some concerns about the person who you're dating. So with that person, you want to address some of those concerns in a way that you're not leading, because if these are true red flags that might point to abuse, you don't necessarily want to already spoon feed them and give them exactly the right answer that, like what someone typed in earlier, might give them that exact perfect manipulative response to make you seem like you're oversensitive, or, you know, like you're the one who's trying to instigate a fight, something like that. You want to just state a concern and ask a question and see how the person responds. And we want to look for a real response. Think about who could be a dating mentor. And when we think about who is the right mentor, I really encourage you to identify someone who you can be totally honest with about anything that is going on in the relationship. And that might or might not be a parent. And parents, recognize that doesn't say anything about your lack of closeness with your child. There are often, by the way, the cases where I speak with parents or individuals who are dating, and it's actually sometimes the close relationships where that parent might not be the right mentor for their child, because maybe it's a little bit too close to home. Maybe your child might start to hold back from sharing with you because they don't want to hurt you. They don't want to disappoint you about something that might be going on in the relationship. Or maybe your child knows that you have your own concerns and anxieties and are feeling protective of them. So they might not want to share everything with you. So a parent might not be the right mentor for their child, and that's okay. Let's just be honest about that. But let's make sure to identify who the right mentors might be. And it's really important, like I said, for that person to be someone who you can share everything with. And I think of a case of someone who shared with me that she had a teacher who she was very close with. This was a teacher who she looked up to, she respected. She wanted this to be a person who could be a role model for her, who she could speak to about things. But when it came to dating, there were some things going on in the relationship that this person was embarrassed to share with his teacher. So she didn't share those things. But some of those things were actually real red flags and concerns. And the teacher, who was just trying to be helpful, didn't have all of the information to work with to be able to really be the right and most supportive mentor to the person in that situation. So make sure to identify a mentor who you can share everything with, the good, the bad, and the ugly, not holding anything back. Esther, if you could speak to sharing concerns, perhaps as a parent and that role.
So our role as parents is really about, it offers us an opportunity for encouraging healthy relationships. And ideally, throughout our children's lives, we should be talking to them about the mean girl at school and how they respond and how they feel about that. We should be modeling healthy repair in relationships when they see some sort of non-agreement in the home. That's not always possible in all homes, but if we do, we're really setting an excellent example for them. We had a situation with a therapist who really told us about a case, and she said there are many cases like that, where parents see something in a relationship that during their child's dating relationship that really causes them major concern. And they think that the young man might be controlling or abusive, and they keep pointing it out to their daughter, and their daughter keeps rationalizing it and justifying it. And it becomes a power struggle between the two. Really, what the therapist pointed out was it became a power struggle between the young man and her parents, both of whom at that point were controlling. And though that was counterintuitive for the parent, the therapist recommended the best thing was to be giving her a chance to ask herself questions as opposed to being a controlling force for her. In general, when your child's dating, even in a healthy relationship, offer support with respect and concern. It takes tremendous discipline on the part of a parent and may actually feel counterintuitive. But think about the bigger picture. Think about maintaining a relationship with your child. So just as Avital explained how important it is for the dater to ask open-ended questions to get insight on a date, it's equally important for us as parents, if we're reviewing a date with a child, to do the same, to ask open-ended questions. Your child comes home from a date, she got a date with the guy that everybody wanted a date, and you really are eager for this to work out. And instead of making space and pauses, or finding out potentially if there was any discomfort, she walks through the door, she's a little bit flushed, half smile, and you say, "How was it?" "Oh, it was good, right?" "Okay, I'm glad," because the shadchan had already called that the boy said, "Yes, I'm going to call Barbara back. You're going to go out again, right?"
Yes, very common, Esther, and really a cautionary tale, because as parents, of course, your role can be transformative to your children when they're dating. And we want to make sure to create space for those pauses from your child, and to be able to give an opportunity for concerns to come up, and hopefully also for positive things to come up, but to really create a space that anything can come up and that they're not being steamrolled into just quickly moving on to the next thing. Because when people are just moving quickly and being steamrolled through a process, there's much more opportunity for rushing through something, for ignoring potential concerns, possibly ignoring red flags. And we have right now, we are already, it's 10 o'clock. We're gonna wrap up. We currently have 320 participants on this webinar and about 40 questions that came in. So of course, we're not gonna be able to go through these, go through all of these questions. One important question that I do wanna right now respond to, a few different people actually spoke about the idea of, well, what happens if you came from a home that was abusive? What happens if you don't have positive role models? Does that mean you're just doomed? And of course, every single person, and we believe this deeply, and we teach this every time we're going out and giving workshops, every single person has the opportunity to enter a healthy relationship and to choose, to make decisions, to identify the right role models if you don't have those role models in your life, to find those people, to identify a mentor, to speak to a trained professional. Somebody mentioned earlier a question, somebody typed in about a dating coach. Finding people who can be mentors for you through this process. And also not giving up, not assuming that just because somebody went through, was from an abusive background, does that mean that they're doomed, that they're going to repeat mistakes? I always like to encourage people to think about the idea that if somebody had a front row seat to an abusive marriage of their parents, then they have the opportunity to know what they don't want to repeat in a relationship. They had that front row seat. They have an opportunity to think about what they do want, and that might take more work. It might mean needing to get more help and to do the work, but it absolutely is possible. We'll just quickly put up on the screen, but this is something that you'll be able to find on our Shalom Task Force website. The Shalom Task Force relationship screening, which I prepared, it's a 2-page screening tool that you can actually, for both the person who's dating and parents as well, can use this tool to ask yourself important questions, to ask yourself open-ended questions like, a parent could ask, how did you feel on the date? Was there a time that felt more comfortable? A person can ask themselves some of these questions of, what do decisions look like? How do we make decisions in this relationship? Does the person put you down, or do you find that you're putting yourself down in order to appease the person? Asking yourself some of these questions. So this is something that you can look at on your own time after and continue to really keep almost in your back pocket while you're dating. Last question, how do I get help? And we, of course, we want to always be able to identify a person you can trust. Parents, remember the role that you serve as parents, and cherish this role and navigate this role carefully, and get help as a parent if you need help during this process. Be honest with yourselves. If you have concerns about your own tendencies or behaviors, there's no shame in that. Just be honest about that. Or if you come from a background that was abusive or dysfunctional, get help. Speak to a trained professional so that you can have a healthy relationship. We want to ask good questions, questions of substance to the person when we're doing research about the person. Of course, trust your gut, as we said earlier. Really just trust your gut. That is one of the most important pieces, tuning into your intuition and how you feel. Recognizing the red flags and patterns. Call our hotline, the Shalom Task Force Domestic Abuse Confidential Anonymous Hotline. The number is in our chat. You can go to our website. The number is 888-883-2323. If you want to request a workshop, we have various programs, various topics. You can reach out to us, find my contact info for educational programs on the website. Visit our website for more resources and content. And now I want to just take the last few minutes now to, number one, please invite you to fill out the evaluation survey, which you can click on. It's pasted in the chat. If you can fill out the survey for us, it's an anonymous survey. It helps us with evaluation of our programs. So if you can take a moment to fill that out. And while everyone is doing that, we will take a couple more questions that came in. Or if I may share some really nice feedback that somebody typed in. Esther, am I allowed to share some like really nice feedback?
Sure.
Why not, right? We're making the rules here. This was by far the best dating webinar I have ever taken. So validating. There are many shadchanim and dating coaches out there who encourage you to overlook red flags and see the good. Please offer webinars to help the guys in our community grow and learn how to share in a healthy way. So to that, I will say, again, I said earlier in the program, we are offering a webinar for the men in our community and their parents this Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock. Please feel free to participate in that webinar as well. And somebody else wrote a really encouraging comment. Everyone has a chance. I'm a product of a child who was abused and is a wonderful parent. Thank you so much for sharing that feedback.
Is there a question about whether this is recorded? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
All the information and this recording can be found on our website. Yes, the answer to the question, there are more workshops. All you need is to make a request and we'll be there.
Somebody asked, how do I find a dating mentor? What do I need to look for in a dating mentor? Please call the Shalom Task Force hotline. You guessed it. We will be able to provide referrals. We have referrals for a whole range of different professionals or community members who can help you through this process. And if you call with specific questions about dating coaches or about community leaders, we can really help guide you in that process of assessing and figuring out if this person is really adept at helping you through this process. You can call with those questions as well.
I think if we would answer all these questions, Avital, we can have 2 more sessions. So.
Right. Well, and now it's, what time is it in Israel now? Like 5?
Okay,
That's time for you to start your day, but I'm going to have to head to sleep soon. But let's do this again. We can absolutely, it looks like there are a lot of questions, a lot of requests coming in. We are so happy that we had this opportunity to share this content with you. We would be more than happy to share more of this content. We, again, are so happy to be able to now offer this program virtually because I know, Esther, we got some requests earlier today from international participants who wanted to know about recording and all of that. So now this program will live on the Shalom Task Force website. You can access it anytime. Please feel free to share it with other people, and we're happy to provide more workshops. I want to end on really a positive note, I hope, which is that some of the most comforting calls that we get to our hotline are the ones where individuals share that they took one of our educational workshops or attended a Shalom Task Force educational program 2, 3, 4, 5 years before, and something about the program stuck with them. Maybe it was a message to just trust your gut. Maybe it was a couple of the red flags that we pointed to. But it's something that they remembered. And students often share, when I read through the evaluation surveys that students write in when we provide workshops at schools, that this workshop is in some ways one of the most important classes that they've ever taken in their life, because it's teaching practical skills. And our hope and our prayer is that these skills serve and that these tools serve as just a resource, a feeling of support. We are here for you. You can call our hotline. Thank you so much for joining us. And I wish everyone success throughout your dating process. As the person who is dating, as the parent or the mentor that is supporting this person. Thank you.
Thanks.